Hello everyone, this is part 4 of What If Naruto Was a Prodigy and in the Anbu, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Team Sigma, Shino mused. He sat there, his chest rested on his palm and showing very little reaction to the Anbu squad that was surrounding him. It was a level of arrogance brought on by one of two things: overconfidence or a level of ability that far outstripped even the elite Anbu. As Naruto stared into those cruel yellow eyes, he couldn't help but feel that the latter was more likely. "I'm surprised," Shino said even as Komaki and Toa darted around the huge stone-faced pillars and drew closer and closer to him. "I didn't think the Hokage's personal assistant would be out and about considering what's happened to the village hidden in leaves. I haven't seen a Team Sigma since the start of the Third Shinobi War." He stood up and Komaki and Toa halted, lurking in the shadows. The elderly man's eyes flickered to them and crinkled in amusement. Naruto, for his part, straightened and eyed the man warily. He discreetly signaled his team, his fingers flying in blazing fast code. Shino, however, chuckled and Naruto paused. "Oh, a flanking maneuver." His face took on wry expression. "And you're going to face me head-on while your two little friends provide closed-range support and the Yamanaka runs interference. That's rude." Was still speaking. Naruto held up his hand, his mind racing. He signaled to abort and Toa and Komaki retreated, obeying their orders and falling back to the other side of the room where Yuka had positioned herself. The Anbu code had been compromised. It was a far bigger security leak than Naruto had thought was possible. This man, the leader of Sky Country, the one who had ordered an invasion against their village, had cracked the secrets of the Anbu hand code. It wasn't just that enemy shinobi would occasionally catch a glimpse and piece by piece the other villages would form a rough dictionary of what signal meant what. This forced Konoha's Anbu communications department to consistently revise, update and modify the code every few years or so. Shino knew current Anbu hand code, the one that had only been implemented 7 months ago. Naruto didn't know how Shino had discovered this secret. Perhaps Yugao had let more slip than she had realized. It didn't matter. Very shortly, the cruel-eyed man would never get a chance to speak of it again. The back of his mind, the one where a voice that sounded suspiciously like Sarutobi's, pointed out that there had been no reason for Shino to reveal his advanced knowledge of Anbu code. Wryly, Naruto wondered if the other man had just had similar thoughts to him, that the Anbu team would never be able to reveal that they had been compromised. "I wasn't actually planning on getting my hands dirty," Shino mentioned quietly. He stood up, his ornate robes draping over his tall and somewhat muscular frame. "But there was something I've wanted to try, and I suppose a Leaf Anbu squad might help me along the way." "Go," Naruto barked. He inhaled, his hands blurring through a series of signs and ending on Tiger, while his teammates flickered forward. Sweltering chakra formed in his mouth and he drew his head back and spat. Fire release. Great fireball technique. A massive streak of fire roared from his mouth and shot forward. Naruto channeled chakra into the technique and kept up his attack as Komaki and Toa appeared on both sides of Shino. They were only there for a split second, Komaki sending a hail of deadly thin senbon and Toa throwing the very last of his explosive tags at the man's face. Naruto couldn't see Shino from beyond the rippling air and bright yellow and orange flames, but he saw Komaki backflip out of the way of something, while Toa jerked and was pushed away from the podium with incredible force. Something dark flickered in Naruto's vision and his instincts screamed. He halted his technique and instantly ducked. Something oily and horrid soared past his head, a shimmering dark light that was almost invisible to the naked eye, and his fire technique was torn apart with ease. Naruto tensed and his eyes shot to the throne, where the fire and smoke was slowly dissipating. Toa and Komaki landed beside him, and awaited their orders. "Medical technique complete," came Shino's voice, but it sounded different, smoother and less hoarse. The smoke disappeared and Naruto's eyes widened in shock. The body revival technique was a success. Where Shino had once stood as a man approaching his twilight years was a much younger and much fitter version of the Sky Country's lord. Long black hair dangled over his bulging shoulders and the wrinkles and creases around his face had disappeared. His ornate robes had been ripped apart from the sudden expansion of his shoulders and chest, a simple pair of blue pants covered his legs and nothing else. Dark light flickered around him, coiling around his fists as he clenched them experimentally. For a moment, Naruto thought that another man had taken Shino's place. But their eyes were the same, piercing yellow and reflecting cruelty and hatred. How did you do that? Naruto uttered quietly. Do you really think I'm going to tell you? Shino said and chuckled darkly. He beckoned at the Anbu imperiously. Come, Leaf Nin. Come and make me talk. Naruto turned and shot a look at Komaki and Toa. They nodded slightly at him and suddenly blurred away. Shino chuckled and surged forward, meeting Toa head-on in a blur of fists. Naruto saw Yuka hovering around the back, her hands twisted into a symbol as she formed her illusionary techniques. Toa ducked and held out his hands. Red light shot from down his sleeve, lines, bars and symbols amalgamated, forming a massive scarlet warhammer as tall as he was. Komaki appeared on his side and a rain of senbon fell. They sparkled and a barrage of lightning-infused pikes slammed into his body. Flesh sizzled and blackened and Shino twitched, letting out a pained gasp. He staggered and fell victim to a heavy two-handed sweep of the warhammer. Shino roared in pain as his leg splintered and exploded in a burst of gore. His mouth was open in sheer agony as Komaki looped a wire around his flailing hand and used it to deliver a series of vicious kicks around his throat and jaw. Teeth cracked and blood splattered as Shino's head jerked back. Naruto was there to finish up, his hands crossed in a unique seal. 3 clones appeared around the wounded Shino, each bearing kunai. 2 stabbed them into the muscular torso, perforating a kidney and a heart. The other jabbed it through the man's neck, dragging it roughly across and severing his arterial veins. The real Naruto darted forward, a compressing swirling ball of humming chakra held in his right hand. He ducked underneath Shino's flailing arms and launched it right into the man's chest. The spirally orb tore through muscles and flesh, expanding and ripping through the Lord of the Sky Country. Shino was sent flying backwards by the sheer force of the technique and he crashed into a technique. Rock cracked, but so did Shino, and with a battered, broken and fatally wounded body he crumpled to the ground. The fight had barely lasted 5 seconds. Naruto, Komaki and Toa were panting as they jumped back and flanked the fallen body. For Naruto, his heart was pounding madly and he was bearing a vicious grin underneath his mask. It was over, the commander-in-chief of Sky Country's armed forces had been. Naruto's thoughts skidded to a halt and he couldn't stop the gasp that escaped his lips. Shino stood, dark light buzzing around him and chuckling quietly, as if Team Sigma had just told him a particularly amusing joke. Dark light flowed around him and the central column, where the same light was racing up past the podium, was glowing. Muscles shifted, bones broke and reset, arteries and veins closed and skin melded back together. After a few seconds, Shino was standing there looking as tough as ever, even tougher, if that was at all possible. Good try, the dark-haired man said. He laughed mockingly, his yellow eyes bearing his savage glee to the stunned Anbu squad. He leaned forward threateningly. Hey, would you like another shot? For the first time, Naruto felt fear. It wasn't the fear of failing the mission or losing his friends or even dying. The young blonde Anbu, 12 years of age, stared at the yellow-eyed man shrouded in dark light and felt a primal and basic fear. Every survival instinct was screaming at him, warning him. He gritted his teeth and jerked his head in response. Toa held out his arms and the scarlet light shot from down his sleeves. His Anbu robes fluttered as his large spiked warhammer appeared and he stepped forward, meeting the other man's challenge boldly. Seeing Toa's defiance made Naruto ashamed of his fear, but he suppressed that too. A battle was no place to wear his heart on his sleeve. How interesting, Shino murmured, eyeing the weapon. It's a very fascinating piece of fuinjutsu. You've got the seal formula tattooed into your skin and woven into the chakra pathways of your arms and upper shoulders, correct? Using that formula, you could create the spiritual representation of almost any weapon. Toa didn't reply. He lunged forward and brought his hammer up over his head. With a quick burst of chakra, he flickered and appeared above Shino, bringing the spiked hammer down with incredible display of brute force. Shino grinned and appeared to brace himself. He held up his arms and blocked the blow. His arms bent backwards, bones tearing through the skin, and they shattered in an instant. Komaki was there an instant later as she coiled wire around his limbs, holding them in place with a system of senbon acting as pulleys. Yuka appeared on the other side of her, her gleaming golden hair coiling up above her head like a serpent. With a whip-like crack, it snapped down and wrapped around his neck. The hair tightened and Shino gurgled as something cracked and his neck bent at an impossible angle. As this was happening, Naruto formed two clones and they all sped through hand seals. Earth release rising stone spears. Wind release, wind cutter technique. Water release, water fang bullet. One clone burst into existence in front of Shino, crouched with his hands on the ground. Sharp stone spikes burst out from the ground, punching through Shino's legs and stomach, ripping into organs and bone. The other clone appeared behind the Lord of Sky Country, sweeping a single hand. An almost invisible blade of wind tore through the air, taking off an ear and most of the dark-haired scalp. The original Naruto weaved his water technique and tossed his water bottle in the air. A pulse of chakra swept through the bottle and it abruptly exploded, 3 spinning funnels of water racing forward and drilling deep into Shino's chest. The piercing water technique burrowed through his rib cage and tore his heart from his chest. Naruto leaned forward from where he stood, watching Shino intently. After a few seconds, the partially scalped man did not move. He nodded and Komaki and Yuka withdrew their binds. Toa lifted his warhammer and gave Shino one more whack, cracking his skull and sending his corpse crashing to the ground. They all waited in tense silence, the distant sounds of Team Mantis battling in the background, as Shino's body jerked and twitched before them. He's still alive, Yuka breathed. Her face was masked but Naruto could imagine the horror on it underneath. It would look a bit like his. Abruptly, the pillar of dark light flared and something rippled through the air. Naruto grunted as he was lifted off of his feet by a rapidly expanding shockwave. His vision blurred and his senses were scrambled. For a split second, Naruto heard a cascading wave of screams and yells of pure agony, fear, terror, hate, anger, desperation, panic, pain, sheer unrivaled pain. It was a single flash of torment and lasted only a fraction of a second. It was enough to make him shudder, his cold and calculated grip on his emotions faltering. His hands shook as he looked up. Shino rose, dark light leaking from his mangled and broken body. Muscles bulged and shifted, layering on each other again and again. His skin closed together and tightened, toughening and hardening. His hair grew out again and his arms thickened. For a split second, Naruto saw past the knitting flesh on his forearm and saw thick plates of bone growing from the splintered remains. Shino laughed with an almost maniacal tone as he flexed his new muscles. To think that medical techniques could be enhanced by dark chakra to this point, he crowed. He stepped forward as Naruto staggered to his feet. Toa, Yuka and Komaki, who had been closer to the blast, remained twitching on the ground. I wonder if this is the secret to Tsunde's power. Is this how she became so devastatingly powerful? He strode past Naruto's weak form, dodging a half-hearted swipe and delivering a vicious kick that sent the blonde Anbu into and through one of the concrete pillars. Naruto groaned as blackness flitted over his vision. His body ached, sapped of strength from the sheer potency of the dark chakra. His own chakra pathways felt sluggish, his tenketsu fluttering open and shut. I do believe that we have enough for a single shot, Shino was saying. Naruto didn't know who he was talking to, maybe him, and he forced his head up. Shino was surrounded by swirling dark chakra, his fingers tapping on it quickly. The easiest part about this weapon is that you can collect the suffering you inflicted with it. It's self-sustaining. I fire it, I kill, the zero-tailed demon worm collects the dark chakra released from human suffering and we power the weapon to fire it again. Komaki and Toa were stirring. Yuka was on her knees, panting madly. But I suppose I need to test it first, Shino admitted and he hummed. The flying fortress began to shudder and quake and the room tilted to the left. The hum of the engines increased and Naruto could picture the giant stone construct turning around. It halted after a few moments as Shino pulled a map out from behind his throne and studied it. Target, Gyanbaru no Machi, he declared. His fists clenched, veins popping up from underneath the skin, and his yellow eyes flickered. A border city between the land of fire and the land of tea, the main trading hub of the region, a population of approximately 100,000 plus a sizable garrison of Leaf Nin perfect. He lifted his hand, Naruto tried desperately to rise to his feet. Fire. Anchor Vantian, the ultimate weapon of Sky Country, fired. Naruto wasn't outside to see the effects of the weapon being activated but he felt it. The entire fortress shuddered and groaned, stone grinding and moaning. Spent kunai and senbon rattled on the floor as the shaft of dark chakra flared. A tremendous pillar of dark light shot forward, sucking up the dim light emanating from the ceiling lights and torches. Naruto clenched his hand and willed his body to move, to do something, anything. The dark glow receded and Shino stood there with an expectant look on his face. His expression was twisted, the glow in his cruel eyes malicious. There was another shudder and the dark chakra pulsed. Shino chortled. Excellent, he crowed. I really must send men to take pictures. He turned, staring down at Naruto arrogantly. This is the power of the zero-tailed demon. Human suffering, collected, stored and used as the ultimate weapon. He sounded insane. There's no such thing, Naruto panted. There are only 9-tailed demons. You're right, Shino agreed. The first Hokage distributed them around the villages now known as the Great Five as a way to maintain peace. Admirable sentiments, really, it was, but he failed. We never had a tailed beast. We were your allies for so long and you gave us nothing. The sheer vehemence in his voice and what he was saying had Naruto confused. So I decided to fix that, Shino continued. He clenched his fist. I created my own tailed beast and implanted it into a Jinchuriki. His yellow eyes flared with madness. The balance of power is broken. My tailed beast is the strongest of them all. Even the 9-tailed beast would fall. Movement and flexibility was beginning to return to his limbs. He tensed his muscles underneath Shino's watchful but unconcerned eye. His chakra was beginning to flow properly, the lingering effects of the dark chakra dissipating. His 3 squad mates, wobbling and Toa still groaning, rose up as well. Shino shrugged. Dark chakra can take a kick out of you, he mentioned casually. It seems your body has adjusted to it somewhat. He grinned manically. Excellent. I was getting bored. Come, Leaf Nin. You only have a few moments to stop me before I turn this weapon on your village and fire. Naruto glared at him furiously. His blood was surging, every fiber of his body was roaring and ready to go. His intent to kill crashed down around the room, joining that of the rest of his squad, and his chakra surged to the forefront. A heavy and deep presence slammed down on the room as Naruto reared up and then he stopped and held out a hand. That little part of his mind, the part he liked to call rationality, was ticking. Shino could have killed them all and there was nothing they could have done to stop him. This was a sobering realization that somewhat dampened his rage. He observed the grinning dark-haired man, his body taut with newly developed muscles, and he slowly began to piece it together. No, he declared quietly. Toa shifted on his feet but held back with the rest of the squad. No, we're not going to attack you because that's what you want. Shino remained silently, smiling cruelly. Our techniques hurt you, Naruto said, his voice taking on confidence and volume as it came together. We use lethal techniques and perform fatal blows and you heal from them all. But, every time you heal you get bigger. His mind flashed back to the thick arm bones, the twisting and squirming muscles, and the hardening flesh. You want us to hurt you. You have a medical technique that rebuilds your body and makes it even stronger. It came crashing down on them. We make you stronger, Naruto realized. He shook his head in disgust, feeling the urge to spit at something. We just made you bigger and tougher. It's why you let us live. You want to get a feel for leaf techniques and harden the areas of the body we attack the most. Very good, drawled Shino. He clapped mockingly. I do have one question though. How will you stop me from destroying your village? Naruto's mind raced. A thought occurred but Anbu code had been compromised. He formed a seal and created 3 shadow clones, which darted to his squad mates and whispered something in their ears. They disappeared a second later and his squad straightened and prepared to attack. Go! Naruto shouted. Toa, Komaki and Naruto flickered from the spot and surrounded Shino. Naruto saw the man's eyes track them as they appeared before him, yet he did nothing, just smiled and casually launched a punch at Komaki. Komaki dodged and her wires glinted in the light as she bound him life before. Naruto flipped through some signs and the stone rose up around them, trapping his outstretched arms and encasing his hands. Naruto formed a sign and the stone glimmered, hardening into a gleaming ebony crystal. Bright scarlet light poured into Toa's hands and he created a series of glowing chains, wrapping them around Shino's body and looping them through the earth technique. Yuka stayed behind and formed a seal. She raised her hands and targeted Shino. Mind-body switch technique. Shino jerked and Yuka paused. All of a sudden, her body convulsed and her eyes rolled into the back of her head. She let out a piercing scream that echoed through the large chamber and sent a dreadful chill down Naruto's back. She shook on the spot, a seizure racking her body. Her blonde hair flailed out and around her but her hands were still brought together. Shino laughed as Naruto made the abort sign and the three Anbu leapt away. He tore across the room and slammed into Yuka, knocking her hands out of position. He twisted in the air and caught her gently as he landed in a neat crouch. Her screaming had stopped, but she still and unresponsive. He gritted his teeth and clenched his fist. Yuka, he hissed. It was all going wrong and despair threatened to overwhelm him. Shino laughed and Naruto jerked his head up. He glared daggers at the man from behind his mask, noting a series of fuinjutsu symbols slowly fade from the man's forehead. It'll take more than a Yamanaka mind technique to crack through Uzumaki Fuinjutsu, he bellowed, still chuckling. Naruto froze. Well, I'm bored now, Shino continued. If you're not going to attack me, then I'll have to attack you. He formed a symbol and crouched. The same medical techniques that let me heal my body let me do this as well. 8 inner gates formation open. The 8th gate, the gate of death. Shino clenched his fists as Naruto jerked back in horror. Dark chakra swelled around him, his muscles tightened and the ground trembled. A massive wave of that revolting chakra swept through the room, picking up debris and discarded weaponry off the floor. Naruto somersaulted as the wave of power sent dozens of Komaki's spent senbon towards him and landed on the ground, staring at the enemy with undisguised horror. His muscles were bulging even more, his skin reddening and his eyeballs rolling back in his head. Chakra pulsed from him, more chakra than Naruto had ever felt before, as all 8 inner gates activated. It was said that those who open all 8 gates would be, for a time, as strong as any cage-level shinobi before dying shortly afterwards. As the dark light flooding the room began to die down, Naruto doubted that Shino would suffer the after-effects of opening the 8 gates as somebody like Guy might have. What a terrifying opponent. I've decided on my title, Leaf Nin, Shino chuckled. His voice was deeper, huskier, but it still retained the hatred and derision from before. He stepped forward and the concrete underneath him buckled and cracked. The Sky Emperor. What do you think? The door burst open, Shino turned and was pushed backwards as a howling gale tore into the room. Team Mantis surged forward as Team Sigma once again clambered up off the ground. Naruto saw the wounds that Team Mantis had suffered, torn and bloodied robes, bandaged limbs for one member, a limb simply gone. Explosive tags and shuriken flew forward as 4 members moved to engage Shino on the other side of the chamber while Mantis appeared before Naruto. We have secured the area and are moving in to assist, he said dully. Code compromised, Naruto gasped, shaking his head dazedly. He's opened the 8th gate. He's a genius with medical techniques. We need to somehow destroy his whole body at once, leave nothing for him to regenerate from. Mantis nodded. We will engage, he declared quietly. Move to support. He disappeared and Naruto jerked his head at Komaki and Toa, who darted forward and fell in line with the other Anbu squad. He remained back, quickly taking Yuka's motionless form and moving her further away from the battle. He made a hand sign, gathered a smear of blood off of his cloak and slammed his hand down on the ground. The Hokage needed to be aware of what was happening. The third Hokage sat behind the table and watched the emergency council discuss matters. His hat had slid down his face, which was quite a relief for him as it hid how weary he was. It had been the first battle since the attack of the 9-tailed demon fox 12 years ago, and once the rush of chakra and adrenaline had worn off, he had found that his hands were shaking. His body was full of aches and pains that he was never aware of before, a sobering realization that he was not as young as he used to. His chakra and spirit was as fierce as ever, but his flesh had withered and grown old. It was quite disheartening. The Anbu commander blurred into the room and the chatter stopped. I have received a message from Captain Tenzo, he said quietly. Message received. Mission complete. 9 casualties, no fatalities. Enemy infrastructure captured intact. Jiraiya is on the scene and will assist in upcoming operations. Request further support to lock down and secure captured assets. Pending threat to Konoha minimal. Koharu breathed a sigh of relief. Tenzo has done well, Homura said gruffly. Shikaku was silent, deep in thought, as excited chatters and murmurs sprung from all around the table. Sarutobi too remained silent, his mind wandering to his foolish little assistant. Truly, Naruto had done well on what should have been a routine regional patrol. His pride in his pupil was only exceeded by his worry. A flying castle manned by Sky Nin, a 0-tailed demon beast, one that Sarutobi had never heard of, the sacking and razing of the Fire Country's southern regions. Something was building. Is it time to reduce the threat to emergency level 2? Inoiki asked quietly. We could allow the recovery and relief teams to leave the shelters and start working on essential repairs. A small monkey burst into the room in a puff of smoke. Sarutobi practically snatched the tattered scroll out of its hands, idly noting the bloody fingerprints on it. Silence filled the room as he uncurled it and began to read. He closed his eyes and let out a small sigh. Gyanbaru no Machi has been destroyed, Sarutobi said, his eyes closed. Team Sigma suggests survivors are unlikely. You could have heard a pin drop in the room. Over 100,000 Fire Country citizens were gone. The Fire Lord would have no choice but to become involved now. There would be repercussions and reprisals truly, this could well be the start of the Fourth Great Shinobi War. The enemy is in possession of a long-ranged weapon capable of striking over far distances. An attack on the village is imminent, Sarutobi continued. Shikaku leant forward intently. Can Team Sigma delay or stop the attack? He asked seriously. Sarutobi paused. Slowly, he shook his head. A contingent of Anbu is on the scene, he said gravely. However, the enemy commander has access to a unique chakra. Sigma reports that this chakra allows the enemy to withstand fatal blows and open the inner gate of death without repercussion. Sigma reports likely mission failure. Seated down at the other end of the table, Guy froze. That's impossible, the normally enthusiastic Jonan muttered to himself. Such an opponent would be S-ranked. As such, we need to counter with an S-rank shinobi of our own, Shikaku said decisively. Jiraiya is nearby. We should have him take command of Tenzo's platoon and launch an immediate attack on the fortress. Sarutobi nodded. Do it, he ordered. He stood up in his chair, his chakra surging around his tired and aching body. His teeth were bared in a somewhat vicious snarl and those closest to him leaned back. Homura. Koharu. Retrieve the second Hokage's scroll of sealing. His two teammates exchanged looks and disappeared. I will attend to the village walls. Sarutobi commanded. All shinobi are to remain on alert. Begin Code 7 Black. All civilian and military forces must be prepared to evacuate the village. Code 7 Black, the abandonment of the village's infrastructure. It had never been activated before, even when the nine-tailed demon fox had appeared in the middle of the village. Sarutobi had only had time to consider it before the events were over. Sarutobi activated a near-instantaneous body flicker and disappeared from the room. The message scroll lay on the table unheeded as the rest of the council began immediate emergency preparations. Only the Anbu commander remained still, deep in thought, and strode effortlessly through the bustle. He took the scroll and read it. Then, he threw it on the table and disappeared, leaving it to roll unsteadily from one side to the other. The last words of the message present. It's been an honor. I'm sorry. It was an impossible battle. The summon dispersed with his final mission report. Naruto fell into line with his comrades and together they fought against the megalomaniac leader of Sky Country. Naruto used every scrap of chakra he possessed, ignoring the burning sensation emanating from his tenketsu as he hung back and provided long-range ninjutsu support. Shadow's clones burst into existence, weaving hand seals, channeling elemental chakra, and dispersing once they had finished. Naruto surrounded Shino on all sides and launched combination techniques that normally would have required several ranked shinobi working in tandem. Komaki and Toa, fatigued and wounded from the earlier battle, stepped in line with him. Komaki launched barrages of senbon infused with lightning chakra, hundreds and hundreds of them unpacking from the storage seals lining the inner layer of her Anbu robes. She pelted Shino, hitting vital points and painful nerve clusters every single time. Toa had formed a bright scarlet bow in his hand and shot gleaming streaks of chakra forward, as fast as any thrown kunai. Team Sigma provided a support role while Team Mantis moved to engage. For a few moments, Naruto was absolutely stunned to see the flawless teamwork that the other Anbu team displayed. There was no wasted movement. Every step forward and backwards had a greater purpose in mind as the five other Anbu almost danced around Shino. Metal glinted and flashed, two of the Anbu holding swords and delivering a series of deep slashes to the enemy's critical points. Mantis was there wielding a fistful of light, blinding intensive beams of focused chakra swinging out and ripping through the hardened muscles and toughened skin with ease. Even the Anbu member with one arm was contributing, using his legs to gain momentum and delivering a series of snapping kicks to Shino's face every time he was in range. This was an Anbu team who had been fighting together for so long that coordination was just like breathing for them. There was no hesitation, no apparent regard for their safety. Between Team Sigma's long-range capabilities and the sheer amount of close combat firepower coming from Team Mantis, Naruto would have usually struggled to think of a single opponent that could have handled them with ease. Even the Hokage would have had to at least try, if only for a few moments. Shino's grating maniacal laugh filled the chamber as he took each blow and strike casually, unconcerned as his body turned to pulp around him. Team Mantis tore into him, taking pounds of flesh for the lives that Sky Country had stolen that day, and the Sky Emperor thanked them for it. Dark chakra swelled around him, his body regenerating almost instantly now. After a few moments, each blow from Team Mantis was doing significantly less damage. Mantis held up his fistful of light and jumped over his one-armed teammate as the latter delivered a vicious kick that snapped Shino's head backwards. The Anbu held out his one good arm and gave Mantis a push. Mantis soared through the air and the light in his hand grew brighter. He thrust it forward, at Shino's head, and for the first time the man reacted. Shino moved as a blur, grabbed Mantis by his arm. His muscles flexed and dark chakra abruptly howled. With a simple jerking movement, as if he was just peeling a banana, Shino pulled down and tore off Mantis' arm. Blood sprayed, Mantis let out an odd choking noise and was flung aside with contemptible ease. One of his teammates caught him and a combined earth-fire technique swelled around Shino an instant later, hot whirlpools of mud and tar surrounding him and enveloping him. Mantis. Naruto broke formation, signaling his team as he did so, and appeared by the other squad leader's side. Combat efficiency reduced, Mantis said. His voice was strangely blank but his one good hand was quivering. Naruto could only marvel at the other man's composure. Nonetheless, a potential weakness has been exposed. His head, Naruto said with a grim nod. It's the only time he defended himself. Mantis nodded slightly. His teammate left him there on the ground and returned to battle as Shino tore himself out of the mud, his skin blistering and melted in several places. Scarlet arrows pierced his lungs, punching through the skin with the effectiveness of a quarrel. Shino's one-armed teammate was now holding a sickle, blue hazy chakra running down on the inside curve of the weapon. Apparently they had also gotten the message a single cut from that would take off Shino's head. Mantis turned his head to Naruto. Ferret, he said calmly. I will bleed out unless this wound is closed. I don't know medical chakra, Naruto said quietly as his comrades fought around them. He held up his palm and it was glowing red, waves of heat emanating from it. I can cauterize it. Mantis nodded. This will hurt, Naruto warned and pressed the fire elemental chakra on his palm firmly into the other Anbu's shoulder. Flesh sizzled and popped and for the first time Mantis let out a slow moan of pain. Naruto finished as quickly as he could and wrapped a bandage around it, hoping that perhaps the medical chakra imbued in it might be able to help in some way to relieve the pain if nothing else. Mantis nodded at Naruto in thanks. He held out his other arm and his chakra technique burst into existence, a hazy fistful of dimmed light. Both squad leaders climbed to their feet and Mantis flickered, disappearing and reappearing on the front lines. Naruto flicked through some hand seals and brought his hand down on the ground. Summoning technique. There was a puff of smoke and Enma appeared. The Monkey King surveyed the ongoing battle and likely made his own assessment in a single moment. He looked down at Naruto, folding his arms and eyeing the young Anbu grimly. This is the commander then? Enma asked gruffly. Yes, Naruto answered quickly. He regenerates from fatal wounds almost instantly. He's activated all 8 inner gates and he's letting us hurt him so that he can rebuild his body to contain resilience to Konoha's techniques. Arrogant, Enma growled. Plan of attack. Head, Naruto replied. He held out his arm. Let's kill this son of a bitch, Enma. The Monkey King nodded and disappeared in a puff of smoke. Naruto reached into it and took the adamantine staff. It fit into his hands perfectly and he could feel the chakra swirling inside of it, the potent life force and energy of the Monkey King condensed into a single gleaming staff. He gripped it and lunged forward. The Anbu were darting around Shino, delivering a series of debilitating wounds to his limbs. Naruto saw a kneecap explode only to reform a second later. Horrible gushing wounds tore into the enemy's thighs and shins, healing almost instantaneously but still slowing the Sky Emperor down. Mantis prowled in the background, darting forward and attempting to deliver a sharp blow to Shino's head as he was distracted and unable to move. Naruto fell in line with the Mantis-masked Anbu and together they nodded. The Anbu around Shino jumped back, paused and resumed their attacks with even greater ferocity. It was a flash and blur of movement as the stone beneath Shino's feet turned to mud. The dark-haired man grunted as he sank into the pit, waving away the Anbu like they were irritating flies as the elite shinobi tore through his arms, impaling them with kunai and wire. There were 2 Anbu members for each arm and they restrained him as Naruto darted forward. He raised the staff it extended but Shino tilted his head. A clawed hand burst out from the staff and Enma gripped Shino by the throat and squeezed. There were pops and cracks as bones were crushed and forced out of place. Naruto fed his own chakra into the staff, augmenting Enma's already impressive strength, and planted his feet on the ground. Shino, his impossibly muscular form immobilized, watched and Naruto relished the sudden fear that entered his yellow eyes as Mantis charged at him with the fistful of wavy bright yellow light glowing in his hand. Mantis pulled back his arm and prepared to deliver the final blow but faltered. Shino hadn't moved. His hands were still trapped and bound. Nonetheless, his body flickered with dark light and Naruto felt the dark chakra ooze over him. In a sudden burst of power, each of the Anbu was thrown away by a shockwave of pure force that emanated from Shino's body. Naruto dropped the staff as twirled in the air and landed on the floor. He opened his hand and Enma elongated back into it. He gripped the firm black surface, breathing harshly. "This is getting dangerous," Shino mentioned casually as he tore through the bindings with ease. He lifted himself out of the pit of mud and shook it off. Yellow eyes surveyed the Anbu maliciously. "Let's end this, shall we?" It was an impossible battle, one that they couldn't win. What followed next showed the clear distinction between a ranked and S-ranked shinobi. Shino simply disappeared on the spot using nothing but the pure speed from his enhanced muscles. He reappeared by one of the struggling members of Team Mantis and lifted a heavy leg. With a start, Naruto realized that Team Mantis hadn't been exposed to the dark chakra before, and he lunged towards them. Enma shot forward but Shino grabbed it and ripped it from his hands. He slammed his foot down on the ground and the stone shattered from the force of the blow. Naruto didn't see what happened but he could guess and he signaled Komaki and Toa furiously. Team Sigma blurred forward, attempting to halt Shino's slaughter of Team Mantis. Enma appeared in a puff of smoke, the angry primate baring his teeth as he delivered a two-handed haymaker to Shino. Shino took the hit and grabbed Enma by his arm. He held out a hand and swirling dark chakra appeared there akin to a Rasengan. He slammed it into Enma's chest and sent the Monkey King flying backwards with incredible force to the other side of the chamber. Enma slammed into the wall in a cloud of dust and slid down it. Shino turned with a vicious grin on his face as Naruto charged at him with a Rasengan. The blonde Anbu jumped and thrust it at his head. Shino was chuckled as he blocked it with the palm of his hand, dark chakra flaring to meet the swirling blue technique in Naruto's hand. Naruto cried out as the bones in his hand shattered. His arm burned as dark chakra washed over it, his momentum stopped. With a sneer, Shino tossed Naruto up into the air and pulled his arm back. Dark chakra swirled around his knuckles. Naruto, twisting in the air, managed to cross his arms over his face in an attempt to soften the blow. It saved his life. Shino's single blow tore both arms out of their sockets. His forearms fractured as shards of bone and flesh was torn apart. They bent backwards, the massive force pushing them into an unnatural angle, and slammed on his face. His head rocked back, his body in agony. Naruto couldn't stop himself from screaming as Shino brutally crushed his guard and launched a punch on Naruto's face. His head swam dizzyingly and a white light rocked his vision. A loud ceramic crack filled the air as the mask on his face splintered apart and Naruto was sent flying by the blow. He landed on something hard and unforgiving and lay there silently. His body broken and his mind dazed, he could only watch the events that followed numbly. Komaki and Toa engaged Shino for a full 3 seconds. Shino brushed past them and spun around, delivering a brutal kick to Toa. Even his scarlet chakra forming a makeshift shield did nothing to soften the blow and Toa was propelled into the roof. The stone around him cracked and he fell limply to the floor. Komaki was next as Shino grabbed her hair. Almost immediately his hand was littered with 100 senbon but he ignored them and lifted her up. He spun her around and Komaki shrieked as most of her hair and parts of her scalp was torn off. She was sent flying and disappeared past Naruto's vision. Team Mantis, having somewhat recovered, attacked. Shino tore them apart, piece by piece. It lasted less than a minute. "Feel this pain, Konoha," he screamed as Naruto watched on dazedly. "Feel the pain of my village. Feel the pain of those that died by your sins." "Sky, country," Naruto gurgled. His mouth was warm with blood and he spat. Sky Country was before my time, why, do you, aren't, this is. His incoherent ramblings attracted the attention of Shino, who stood wreathed in the dark light of the chakra of the zero-tailed demon worm. With a roar of anger, Shino punched one of the columns in the chamber and it turned to dust. Fuck Sky Country, he boomed. Do you think they're the only ones that Konoha wronged? Sky Country and I had a common goal, that's it. They were useful so I helped them with their little flying machines. What you did to my village was much worse. Naruto opened his mouth to respond. He froze. A sudden surge of chakra, something fierce and primal, clamped down in the room. Shino froze and spun his head, his eyes wide as the chakra raged, wild and untamed. A large bulky person was emerging from the shadows, orange and yellow eyes peering out from the darkness. Senjutsu. Somebody rumbled harshly. It was Enma. Where he had once appeared humanoid, he now appeared like a true mountain gorilla. His armor had fallen away, revealing thick white and gray fur, and his face had twisted. Orange streaks of fur crisscrossed the area around his eyes and he was something potent swirled around him, dancing just out of reach of Naruto's senses. What's this? Asked Shino, his voice no longer cocky. What's this chakra? Enma didn't say a word. He hunchbacked on his forelegs and the ground cracked. Shino's eyes widened as Enma let out a deafening roar and charged at him. It was almost comical, a mountain gorilla weighing hundreds of kilograms with thick bulging muscles bounding forward. Shino didn't seem to think so and he dodged the first swing, swinging his leg back to prepare a counter. Suddenly, his face splintered and rocked back and he was pushed off his feet. Blood spluttered from his lips as he landed neatly and cocked a fist back. Dark chakra swirled around his hand and he met the next wild fist with one of his own. The air was full of howling wind and the ground trembled and shook. For the first time during this fight, Shino was pushed back by the sheer force of the punch. He growled and countered with his own punch. To Naruto, what followed was the pinnacle of hand-to-hand combat. Two beings, masters of strange and unusual chakras, met in a blur of fists. The air twisted and howled underneath the force of the blows and the thick stone was begun to give way in many places. What was left of the podium disappeared underneath the brutal combats, punches and kicks leveled blocks of stone and walls with ease. Shino and Enma fought, each landing blows on each other that would topple buildings, and Shino fell back. His body was bruised and bleeding, unable to withstand this new form of chakra that Enma was using. That's enough, he roared. Light flared in his hand and he let the Monkey King slam his fist in his face. He brought up his hand and pressed his fingers into the thick coarse fur. Fuinjutsu. Breach of contract. Lines of symbols appeared on Enma, who looked outraged, before the Monkey King disappeared with a flash of light. Shino fell to the ground, panting and clutching his newly broken body. It was only beginning to heal now and for the first time Shino looked worried. What was that? He murmured quietly. Naruto's hands were in splinters, he couldn't resummon Enma so he rose. His teeth scrapped the floor as he grabbed a kunai with his teeth. With the last of his strength, Naruto charged at the enemy. His body was light and his mind was strangely clear. Shino, distracted, looked up and his eyes widened as Naruto jumped up. He kicked and Shino's bleeding head snapped back. With a snarl, Naruto brought his head down and slammed the kunai held in his mouth into the base of the Sky Emperor's exposed throat. Something cracked. Distantly, Naruto was aware of little chunks of his teeth and gum falling from his mouth. He stood there, frozen, as the kunai that was held in his teeth shattered. The metal splinters cut open his mouth and cheek as they fell to the ground. Numbly, he saw that the metal point of the weapon had not even broken skin. He gurgled as a thick hand wrapped around his throat and lifted him up in the air so he was face to face with Shino. You're so young, Shino muttered, staring at Naruto's exposed face. And so well trained. Konoha truly does make monsters, doesn't it? Naruto struggled futilely as the grip tightened. Anbu came here awfully quick after Konoha was attacked, Shino whispered. Darkness lurked his gleaming eyes. It wasn't even a day and you have launched a counterattack such efficiency. Tell me though, where were you back then? We waited for weeks. Naruto squirmed. His head was beginning to get light as his lungs screamed for oxygen. Shino held out his other hand and dark chakra swirled. Goodbye, little Anbu. He snarled and thrust it into Naruto's chest. Naruto's body jerked and his eyes widened. What he felt was beyond pain, it was absence. His chakra spluttered and died, his limbs stiffened and his eyes rolled back into his head. Darkness immediately encroached on his vision and everything became wreathed in shadows. Distantly, he heard Shino speak. This is my vengeance, my revenge on Konoha's abandonment of the village hidden in whirlpools. The Uzumaki clan will be avenged. Then the darkness rose to meet him. It was wet and cold. Naruto lay in the water, unmoving. Torches flickered. Two gleaming eyes opened and stared from behind bars of unbreakable steel. The water surged. Take it, the voice rumbled. Take this power. It's what you want. It's what your accursed clan has always wanted. Take it. The water swirled around Naruto's unresponsive form and glowed with an ominous red light. The staring eyes slowly closed. Shino regarded the young boy held in his grip and shook his head. The Anbu's eyes were closed, his head lolled back and his spiky blonde hair covered with muck and grime. He shook his head and withdrew his hand from the boy's chest. His dark chakra had torn most of the major organs apart and it dripped onto the ground. This is my vengeance, he told the corpse strongly. My revenge on Konoha's abandonment of the village hidden in whirlpools. The Uzumaki clan will be avenged. He moved to throw the boy aside and then he froze. Tight, strong, clawed fingers gripped into his hand and sharp nails pierced his skin. He turned his head and met the now crimson gaze of the young Anbu agent. As his forearm shattered underneath the force of Ferret's grip, a crimson chakra burst into existence and swirled around him. A torrent of oppressive and foul-tainted power spiraled around the boy, crisscrossing and slicing through the floor. Stone was torn apart and large, bloody welts appeared on Shino's torso from where the chakra sliced through him mercilessly. The pain he felt from that was nothing compared to the current torment in his heart. No, Shino whispered in denial. He shook his head as the chakra grew stronger and stronger, crimson fire lighting up the entire room. His face was screwed up in unbridled horror. Mito, he whispered. The boy arched his back and howled. It was the howl of a beast, the howl of the damned, the howl of the nine-tailed demon fox. It was the howl of Uzumaki Mito's legacy. Crimson slitted eyes peered down at him murderously and a clawed arm rose. Shino saw bone fragments and flesh knitting back together, cracking and deforming as they slid back into place. The clawed hand slammed into the side of his head and swept him away in a wave of foul chakra. He flew. The force of the blow sent him tumbling into and through the broken remains of a concrete pillar and across to the other side of the chamber. He lay there for a moment, more stunned with his sudden realization than the actual attack. The boy fell to the ground and dropped to all fours, chakra swirling around him. It was a shroud of formless and mindless power, more dark and foul than almost anything Shino had felt before. He clenched his fist and allowed the chakra generated by the zero-tailed demon worm to fill his body. With gritted teeth, Uzumaki Shino stood up and prepared to fight his family. Naruto was on fire. His entire body burned with that unholy chakra as it seeped into every crevice and pore. Cuts, bruises and aches all disappeared. Broken teeth fell from his mouth as new ones grew to replace them. His arms creaked and groaned as bones slid back into place, blood vessels knitting back together and flesh smoothing over them. His heart pumped furiously, adrenaline and chakra flowed freely and strengthened his thickening muscles, and every facet of the flight or fight reaction was perfectly tuned. In his 12 years of life, Naruto had never been physically healthier. Mentally and emotionally, his first taste of the nine-tailed demon fox's power was unbearable. There was heat. There was power. There was will. There was anger and hate and loneliness and everything that Naruto thought he had left behind in his old life. The culmination of 12 years of pent-up emotions, masked as a child and suppressed as a shinobi, raced through him. It hurt. It hurt so much and he clutched his head. The feeling was indescribable. Naruto did what every other human being did when they felt pain. He grew angry. He raised his head, howling, and the swirling chakra around him howled too. It bubbled and hissed, tearing through the stone floor around him. Clutching his head, he wept. The tears hissed and evaporated as soon as they appeared. Naruto turned his head and glared down at Shino with unbelievable fury. "You traitor!" Shino bellowed. His cocky and self-satisfied smirk was gone and he trembled with complete and utter fury. He wore a look of a man betrayed. "Why are you fighting for them? They let your family die." Dark light burst into existence around him and he clenched his fists. "That's unforgivable." Naruto didn't respond. He wasn't quite sure if he actually could. Nor did he want to. Shino. It was his fault. He made him feel this pain, this sheer torment that represented his existence. Naruto would take it out on him and perhaps afterwards he would feel better. Maybe this pain would go after he had sated his hatred. Naruto blurred and red chakra propelled him forward. He torpedoed into Shino, who gladly met his charge, and they fought. Chakra-enhanced limbs flashed against each other, dark chakra meeting its crimson counterpart in showers of sparks. Naruto's form had little style or technique. He was an angry rolling mess of limbs, each blow thrust forward with the intention to hurt. Shino was the same, the dark chakra fueling him as he battled against the nine-tailed Jinchuriki. Their blows shattered the concrete around them and shrouds of chakra battled above them. Naruto lashed out with a clawed arm and Shino ducked. Red chakra flashed and swung out, forming a crude representation of a clawed paw. It punched him from under the chin and he was slammed into the roof. The same arm twisted and turned past his shroud of dark chakra and grabbed his leg. Without any effort, it tossed his massive bulk across the room. Shino was thrown aside and went crashing through the last stone pillar in the room. An instant later, he bellowed and a shockwave of dark light swept aside the crimson chakra and knocked Naruto off his feet. Both Uzumaki clambered to their feet, glaring at each other murderously. To think I would find family, Shino growled. He bared his teeth and his muscles bulged, repairing the damage Naruto had done to him and strengthening him. And to think that the last of my family would turn against the clan. Naruto clutched his head and howled furiously. Chakra swirled around his mouth, he inhaled and a torrent of uncontrollable fire spewed out towards Shino. Shino batted it aside with another dark chakra-enhanced shockwave and watched as Naruto fell to the ground, clutching his head and panting. Movement flickered in his eyes and Naruto spun, a red-shrouded fist rising and thrusting forward. His sharp teeth twisted into a savage grin. He let the crimson light wash over his vision as his heart ached in loneliness. Ferret. Naruto hadn't realized that he had stopped. He stared past his fist, inches away from his target, and saw Yuka staring back at him. Her mask was removed and she was holding one hand on her temple. Her blue eyes were wide and round, staring at him wordlessly. Naruto growled and fought every urge in his body as he lowered his fist. He jerked his head. Go, he growled. His voice was guttural and rough. Take them and go. Yuka disappeared in a flash and Naruto turned back to Shino, who stood there gazing at him in pure disgust. He didn't seem concerned at all as Yuka roused Toa and Komaki, the only Anbu around, still in one piece, and dashed from the room. Was this their plan? Shino asked dangerously. Dark chakra seeped his hands as he stepped forward. First it was Mito and then it was Kushina. Now, it's you, another Jinchuriki of the nine-tailed demon fox. I guess they didn't need us anymore after they started their own Uzumaki clan. What are you talking about? Naruto roared. The flash of rationality that had surfaced when Yuka had appeared was fading away under the weight of his own heart. You've killed my friends. You've hurt my village. You tortured. You burned. I hate you. I'm going to fucking kill you. His fury built and he howled as the chakra around him coalesced. It swirled around him, bubbling and spluttering loudly, and took on the visage of a fox. His teeth sharpened and his lips were pulled further and further back into a canine-like grin. A single tail of the potent chakra swished behind him. He darted forward in a blur and the two Uzumaki fought. Demonic chakra met and clashed, their fists and knees were like blurs and room exploded with light. Naruto swung and swiped with all his might, his unquenchable thirst for vengeance clouding his mind. With this chakra, he was just as fast as his opponent and regenerated just as quickly. Shino punched him in the face and broke his nose and jaw. Naruto retaliated with a flash of crimson chakra that tore off Shino's arm. Shino kicked him in the knee, splintering the bone, and yanked his head. His neck cracked, red chakra shrieked, and Naruto plunged a hand through his opponent's chest and ripped out a rib. Shino head-butted Naruto and threw him to the floor, raising a leg to stomp down on him. Naruto caught the foot, broke it and sent Shino soaring through the air. The elderly Uzumaki twisted and dark light built in his hand. He sent a streak of it forward and it plunged into Naruto like a bullet. Naruto shook his head dazedly even as his wounds regenerated. He darted forward, his tail swishing behind him. I hate you. Naruto howled, his claws tearing through skin and bone. I hate you so much. I want you to burn. It's your fault. He punched, kicked and fought. Why do you look away from me? I'm here. I'm real. Stop ignoring me. His words made no sense but they infuriated Shino. You're not even looking at me. Shino roared angrily. Listen to yourself. You hate Konoha as much as I do. Why are you fighting me? We're family. We're family. Naruto howled incoherently and the world became a blur. He roared, chakra waves exploding from him. With each howl and without seals he formed fire chakra and it came naturally and instinctively. He blew it out and metal and stone turned white hot. The bodies of his fallen comrades were turned to ash as he breathed in wide arcs, setting the whole room on fire and uncaring of the damage he was causing. The floor rumbled and shuddered, the fight threatening to tear down the foundations of Anbu Vantian. Shino weathered the assault, one hand curled behind his back. With a vicious kick, he sent Naruto spinning away and raised his hand. Yellow symbols fared on each of his fingers as he thrust it at Naruto. Sealing technique, 5-pointed star. Naruto slammed into a translucent yellow star-shaped barrier that surrounded him on all sides. He roared and banged his hands against it. Something cracked as Naruto railed on the barrier with all of his might while Shino watched on. With a deadly look in his eyes, Shino snapped his fingers and barrier brightened. It exploded in a column of light that tore through roof and floor. The bright yellow light suddenly wavered and it turned crimson. Naruto emerged but not unscathed. His skin had practically melted away, the red chakra rapidly regenerating it, and his robes were mere tatters. Shino saw swirling black symbols scrawled around his navel. Before his eyes, they seemed to shift, stretching out and widening on the exposed skin. Naruto howled again. The crimson chakra seemed to resonate with the young boy's hatred and it bubbled around him furiously, leaking from his bloodied wounds and taking form. It coalesced again, becoming denser and thicker, and creating another swishing tail. Shino chuckled bitterly. His body was bulging, unnaturally so, and terrible bruises were forming underneath his skin even in places where Naruto hadn't struck him. Look at us, he yelled, waving his arms. We're the last of our clan trying to kill each other. He laughed hysterically as Naruto clutched his head. He was panting, the chakra around him swirling, and the heat and flame and power was too much. He collapsed to the ground, shuddering, as Shino's laughter rose in pitch. Your body is breaking apart. Shino hissed. Is this your first time using the power of the tailed beasts? Your body is struggling to hold it. Then again, so is mine. He grinned ferociously. You're stupid, poor, pathetic traitor. Shut up. Naruto roared. He clutched his head and shook it. Shut up. Shut up. Shut up. Shino ignored him. Do you know who you're fighting for? He asked maliciously. You're fighting for the people that left our family to die. We were promised aid and support and so we held a defensive position. We trusted in Konoha and we paid for that trust in lives. He leaned forward. They came and they murdered us. Their Jinchuriki tore through our barriers and their shinobi swept into the village. They slaughtered us all. My family, my son, my daughter ripped apart by a blade of the 7 swordsmen. He leant forward, his voice dropping to a deadly hiss, his eyes alight with madness. His was frothing at the mouth, spittle flying forward as he ranted. We fought and we lost, he said darkly. I survived, holding on to life with a dozen blades in me. I left the village of whirlpools with the last words and thoughts of the Uzumaki clan. At the end, they screamed of their hatred towards Konoha, the village that abandoned them. I promised them that I would seek vengeance in their honor. Naruto was gasping for air, as if was having trouble breathing. One clawed hand clutched his heart, the other his head. Shino straightened and called upon his dark chakra. The battered floor tilted as Anbu Vantian turned and Uzumaki's yellow eyes glinted. Fire on Konoha. He roared and the dark chakra leapt to his command. Anbu Vantian buckled and Naruto roared in fury. Shino turned, keeping his distance from the haze of deadly crimson chakra. Feel the pain of your family, he said, and there was a gentle tone of madness in his voice. His eyes seemed to swirl. Feel the pain of betrayal as your own family destroys the place you love. Watch as I find your friends and hack them to pieces in front of you. Survive, clinging to life with cowardice, and flee. Perhaps then you will truly understand my pain. Henge. Shino had taken a step forward, his entire body covered in thick purple bruises, when something shot at him. His eyes widened as a black blur shot across the room and slammed into him. He grunted and suddenly parts of his body seemed to explode in showers of blood and gore. The blur pushed him backwards into the wall, bones shattering. He went through the wall, and then the next and then he was gone. Naruto was panting as he watched and he saw bright blue sky at the other end of the tunnel as the black blur extracted. He cocked his head, chakra bubbling furiously around him, as Enma stepped forward, pulling back the long adamantine bar that his arm had become. Naruto snarled and swiped at the Monkey King, who dodged and darted through Naruto's defenses. He slapped Naruto on the head and then it was over. The heat left. The power faded. His hatred dimmed. Naruto was left panting on the floor, his body a weak and shivering mess. It was so cold, his limbs felt impossible heavy and frozen, as Enma stood over him. Something was obscuring his view and he slowly reached up and grabbed a tag off his forehead. The paper was yellowed and smelled musty. There had been a symbol written on it in neat loopy handwriting, but it slowly faded away before his eyes. Naruto gurgled and choked on his own vomit as Enma carefully helped him up. Konoha, Naruto muttered, his chin stained with vomit. Enma. He gripped the Monkey King's fur feebly. They fired. Go. Warn him. Naruto, Enma rumbled. Go. Naruto yelled with all his strength. Enma gave him a look and disappeared in a puff of smoke. Naruto lay back down, ignoring the smell of his vomit. He was breathing harshly and felt tired, so very tired, but he slowly turned his head and eyed the pillar of rising dark chakra in the background. Sarutobi stood on the walls of Konoha. Behind him, the village was deserted and surrounding him was a squad of Anbu, each crouched around him ready to defend him with their lives. He regarded the thick and heavy scroll in front of him grimly and waited. They had been there for 15 minutes before something happened. A puff of smoke appeared and Enma appeared, looking strained and wearied. It's coming, was all he managed to say before he flinched and disappeared. Sarutobi nodded grimly. Part of him was concerned about his old friend, knowing that multiple reverse summonings was not good for the body, human or animal. There was a reason why the process hasn't become part of their military doctrine. Enma would likely be out of commission for several days. He cleared his mind and knelt down in front of the scroll. Shikaku had calculated the most likely angle of attack from Sky Country's weapon and turned to face that direction. Blood oozed from his old fingers and slid over the scroll as Sarutobi placed one hand on it and stretched the other in front of him. The air trembled and an immense pressure dropped on his surrounding guards as he gathered his chakra and prepared to use the technique. Hokage-sama, his Hyuga Anbu guard called out. His Byakugan must have been activated. There is a massive burst of chakra coming this way. It's bigger than anything I've seen before. ETA. Sarutobi grunted. It's moving so quick. The Hyuga hissed. You have seconds, sir. Sarutobi could see it on the horizon, a blinding beam of crackling dark light surging straight at the village hidden in leaves. He braced himself and his chakra flared into existence around him. Space-time technique. He thundered. Open the eternal schism of the bronzed mirror. He gestured and the air in front of the village suddenly cracked. The sound of breaking glass resounded throughout the village as bits of blue and green color fell apart like a broken mirror. The air broke as space and time was shattered and the eternal emptiness of nothingness filled his vision, a deep and dark abyss that confounded his eyes. It was all colors and it was none. It defied the senses and hovered in front of the village. Sarutobi grunted and lifted an arm. The air above the village also broke apart and an identical rift in space and time was forced into existence. The incoming beam of dark chakra slammed into the abyss and Sarutobi let out a loud grunt. He fell down to both knees, one hand pressed against the scroll and one hand lifted in the air. Light blazed around the dark curtain as the surging beam of chakra bore down on it. A loud gong boomed forward as the dark chakra appeared from the schism above the village, shooting up into the sky. Sarutobi was gasping, his power raging about it furiously, and he stood strong and weathered the storm. For the sake of the village. Naruto had managed to stagger to his feet and he limped over to the pillar of dark chakra. It was coming from the bottom of a long shaft that must have gone from one end of the fortress to the other. A series of rungs had been bolted into it, so Naruto took a deep breath and began to climb down. The pillar of dark chakra was only centimeters away from his body as he descended the ladder and entered a large cavern. At the center of the cavern there was an altar. Hundreds of immense thick tubes extended from each side of the altar and fed into the layout of the fortress. On top of the altar was a swirling mass of the dark chakra, spiraling around and being sucked into the different pipes and tubes. Naruto limped over as the foul chakra hummed ominously in the background. Lying down on the altar was a young girl, no older than he was. At first Naruto thought she was clothed, but then he realized that she was completely nude. Tens of thousands of little symbols had been tattooed onto her skin and her back was arched, her mouth opened in an endless and soundless scream and the whites of her eyes staring unblinkingly at the roof of the cavern. This had to be the Jinchuriki of the Zero Tails. I'm sorry, Naruto murmured sorrowfully. I'm so sorry for what he did, for what my family did to you. But don't worry, I'll put you to rest now. He pulled out the kunai he had taken from the debris-littered battleground and raised it above his head. Focusing his weak and spluttering chakra, a hazy wind formed around it. It took a few seconds to stabilize. With a deep breath, Naruto plunged it through the haze of dark chakra surrounding the unconscious red-haired girl. Wind chakra howled as it pierced the unnatural chakra and Naruto forced himself to watch as he methodically cut her throat. Blood seeped and splattered over the altar and Naruto cried out as his kunai was wrenched from his grasp by the shroud of dark chakra and flung to the other side of the room. For a moment, Naruto watched and wondered if the girl had similar healing properties that Shino and he did. Then, the seals of her skin began to shrivel and warp and the entire fortress rumbled. The dark chakra spluttered and began to fade as dust fell from the ceiling. Naruto jumped back as a large block of stone fell right where had been standing and watched as the fortress began to crumble right before his eyes. A horrible screeching noise filled the air and Naruto clasped his hands over his ears. The sounds of muffled explosions arose from the upper decks and the huge cavern began to shake and fall apart. He ran, using his meager chakra reserves to scale the side of the shaft where the pillar of dark chakra had come from. Chunks of stone and metal fell all around him as he darted through the corridors. Explosions continued to detonate from all around the fortress and he came to a screeching halt as a ball of fire blossomed right in front of him. He threw himself against the wall and covered his head as he blazed over him. Something was burning but Naruto ignored it as vital adrenaline surged through his body. His breaths came in short pants as he span around another corner and began to make his way to the upper decks. Perhaps there was another transport ship. Maybe he could work out how to fly it. He ran as fast as he could and with the last of his strength. His vision was dimming as the exhaustion and fatigue of the events of the past day caught up with him. He ran until his body had nothing left to give and then he continued to run. Finally, he could run no more and with his faltering footsteps ended. He lost his balance and fell right into something warm, which circled him. He looked up and saw Daichi and Toa standing there, the latter holding him carefully. I ordered you to leave, he murmured. Toa looked battered and he was bleeding. Nonetheless, he responded with a sense of cockiness. Hitaki Kakashi was my squad captain before you were. He really only had one rule to follow and I don't intend to explain to him why I became worse than scum. Naruto had no idea what he was talking about and rested in his teammate's arms. He bounced and buckled as Toa and Daichi sprinted through the fortress and only opened his eyes when he heard the howling of the wind. Toa was standing in a large flying machine, where Yuka was tending to an unconscious Komaki. Daichi moved to the front and Naruto swiveled his eyes around the hangar, where another flying machine packed with the civilians they had rescued awaited. Manning the cockpit of that one was Cage, who gave him a wave. The flying machines lifted off with a steady hum and surged out of the hangar doors. The wind whipped in his face and Naruto watched as the flying stone fortress, the seat of the Sky Emperor, crumbled and exploded behind him. It was already beginning to fall to the ground as the two flying craft soared away. Mission complete, Hokage-sama, Naruto muttered. He fell asleep a second later. Sarutobi gasped as the space-time technique finished. His ears were ringing as his Anbu squad surrounded him and darkness encroached on his vision and he collapsed to the ground. He was distantly aware of being picked up and moving away from the walls before he fell unconscious. Shino watched the destruction of his fortress from the forest floor where he had been flung. His body was broken and battered, kept alive only by the medical techniques that the elderly Uzumaki worked on himself. His dark hair had turned white again and his muscles had sagged, bags of loose skin hanging limply from his gangly limbs. Something filled his vision, a robe of black and red, and he looked up at the sun obscured by the setting sun. He grunted at what he saw and closed his eyes. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.